Good evening, everyone. I am Christopher Miller, Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement at the National Underground Railroad Freedom. And we want to thank you for joining us. February is Black History Month, but keep in mind this is a rich history that needs to be acknowledged and celebrated 365 days of the year. And so we encourage all of you to do so. This experience has been curated with the backdrop of the 2021 Black History theme, the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. The Black family has been a topic of study in many disciplines, including history, literature, the visual arts, social policy, and much of what we will talk about today, the culture of the culinary arts. We're indeed happy to be joined in partnership with the African American program of the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so, without further ado, I would like to invite my friend and colleague from that great institution, Mr. Samuel Black.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. My name is Samuel W. Black. I am the director of the African American program at the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. For those of you who are not familiar with the Heinz History Center, it is the oldest cultural institution in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the largest history museum in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We date our institution to 1879 and is typical of your big city historical society slash museums. Our footprint is pretty large and continues to grow. We operate not only the Heinz History Center, but also the Western Pennsylvania Sports Museum, the Fort Pitt Museum, and the Meadowcroft Historic Village and Rock Shelter. In addition to the Thomas and Catherine Detre Library and Archive. So we're continuing to grow as an institution, and the African American program is one of many programs at the institution, but it's one of the oldest of the ethnic programs at the institution. So we operate an archive, a museum, and so we collect history related to African Americans in Western Pennsylvania. So that covers a lot of things, including jazz, including sports, including education, science, and a number of endeavors. We are really happy this evening to have three distinguished panelists on our program this evening, and I'm more than pleased to begin the introductions and introduce someone who is a favorite of mine and an advisor to me, actually, in my From Slavery to Freedom project, and that is Dr. Jessica B. Harris. And many of you know of Dr. Harris. She's an author of around 12 books of culinary history, of which I have a couple, High on the Hog and Africa Cookbook. But she is also a journalist and teaches at Queens College in the CUNY system in New York, as well as was very much instrumental at Dillard University with establishing the Culinary Center for Culinary Arts at Dillard University. She was the Ray Charles Chair in African American and Material Culture at Dillard, and helped start the Institute for the Study of Culinary Cultures at Dillard University. So Dr. Harris will talk with us this evening on a number of topics, but primarily about that culinary history and those aspects of the Black family.
And as well, we have joining us this evening for this conversation, Kristen Haynes. She is an emerging scholar. She is a product of HBCU, Florida A&M. She is the founder of the Black Family Scholar. I encourage you to find her website, where she does a wonderful job of talking about the narrative and significance of the Black family. She has a scholarly education on the sociology of the Black family, as well as diving in, as well as creating cookbooks to really mesh with dealing with the trauma and agony that the Black family has faced over years, but seeing how that is resonate at the dinner table of having these conversations about family history. And so we are so happy to have her joining with us today. And then we also have with us Dr. Eric Jackson, who is the professor of history and director of Black World Studies at Northern Kentucky University. He serves on many boards of historical institutions. He is also a published author dealing with the history of Cincinnati as well as Northern Kentucky. And so we are so pleased and happy to have these wonderful, wonderful scholars here at the table. I'm not going to stay away because we want to get right into this wonderful conversation with our three brilliant scholars that we have here. And so we are ready for this outstanding conversation. I will say, if you have any comments or questions, please place them in the chat and we will do our best to answer and reply to those comments in the chat. Thank you.
So we'll get started with the program right now, and I really want to start with Dr. Jackson and ask you, how has the Black family dynamics changed in the last 160 years? That's since the Civil War.
Wow, that's a huge question to try to capsulize here in the time I have. Let me try to break it into two areas. First, let's talk about what the literature says. And so probably one of the first books that talked about the Black family was produced by W.E.B. Du Bois in 1899, The Philadelphia Negro, where he talks about the Black family in Philadelphia. Then you have in 1949, E. Franklin Frazier published a book on the Negro family. But probably the most powerful piece, both good and bad, was published in 1965 by Patrick J. Moynihan, when he puts out this report from the federal government to try to capture the state of the Black family during the 60s. And that report came out in 65. Particularly, he was trying to figure out what was the role of the federal government's impact on the Black family, especially during the mid 60s and late 60s when you had urban upheavals going on. And his argument was that the enslavement period had damaged the Black family so much that it was the federal government's responsibility to create federal programs and policies to help fortify the Black family. And that was just the government's perspective on the Black family. And so from that point on, all the literature from that point on had to deal with Moynihan's piece over time that moved into other people like Andrew Billingsley comes up with a study in 1968 on the Black family. You had Carol Stack piece coming up in the 1974 called All Our Kins. Other folks are writing in the 70s and the 80s. But what is most powerful and most important here has to do with policies and procedures from the federal government that impact the Black family probably on 4 or 5 different areas. The issue of poverty, healthcare, education, the media, and childcare. So all of these federal policies and programs impacted the Black family on its negotiation, its survival skills, or what I call the 3 areas of how the Black family has survived over time since its inception in the United States, under these 3 concepts of contradiction, meaning the people are saying what the Black family should look like and how it's operating were not necessarily the same. Struggle, the Black family has always struggled to uphold its normality, but most importantly, perseverance, that the Black family, regardless of what was going on around them, and it's changing over time, especially since the Civil War, its impact on the Reconstruction era, the 1920s, 1930s, and the 40s, 50s, and up until today, the Black family has figured out a way to persevere. And a major attack that's been on the Black family and how it's tried to figure out how to persevere is trying to negotiate federal policies and programs, but at the same time, trying to persevere, maintaining its own separate culture and norms. I know that's a lot to unfold.
But it's great to get us started because what I want to ask now that Dr. Jackson has opened up and talked about the studies and reviewed some of the literature, and especially the Moynihan report, that I look at as sort of an external view of the Black family dynamics. So let's go internal to the Black family dynamics and ask Dr. Harris about the importance of food and culinary traditions to the Black family.
It's interesting to be talking about Black family traditions, particularly the culinary, in that today would have been my parents' 83rd wedding anniversary. So I think when we start talking about Black families, we need to look at some of that longevity. We all hear about the disparities and the confusion and the everything else, but there is some deep-seated longevity that is also a part and very much a parcel of our tradition. I think when we start looking at food and the African-American family, and we look at the food and the culinary traditions, we need to look at them in two different ways. Let's talk first about the power of family in and of itself and the things that one has had to struggle against. If we go back and look at the period of enslavement, and during that period of enslavement, if we look at the different methods by which the enslaved were fed, we begin to see all sorts of things happening. So if you want to break them down, they're pretty much three, generally speaking, and this is horrible generalizations. So one would have been group preparation. The food was prepared in a group fashion, sometimes a communal fashion. It was prepared somewhere, either on the row of slave cabins, for want of a better terminology, or in the big house kitchen and distributed. The food was then taken to individual areas and eaten. That's one way. There is a second way, which was group preparation, that same method of preparing, but then communal eating. Everyone sort of ate in some kind of communal manner. And then the third would have been individual preparation, where each group, each family unit prepared. Now, this is what's being prepared. What's being prepared is a whole nother story. You begin to talk then in terms of what's being prepared about the way that individuals tried to maintain life, for want of a better thing. Rations were more often than not scant. And so they were supplemented. They were supplemented by foraging. They were supplemented by fishing. They were supplemented in many cases by garden plots. If you read the gardening books or the record books of even some of the founding fathers, they were buying produce from their enslaved individuals. So that you will find that Jefferson, for example, bought vegetables from his enslaved folks. Washington bought things from his enslaved folks, and so on and so forth. So there was always a tradition of trying to grow, trying to keep going, trying to make enough, trying to, as they used to say, make a way out of no way. Okay, trying to have enough to survive, not just individually, but as a family unit. I think with that, then you begin to talk about the kinds of things that they may have grown. And there you begin to look at some of the traditions, the holds, the links that went back to the continent that are even evident today on our tables. We see some of the dishes for which African Americans are most praised and equally most demonized in terms of foodstuffs are things that in fact connect us with the continent. So you'll find watermelon. There have been few images of African Americans more rabidly racist than those of us and watermelon. And what we didn't know or what we don't think about is watermelon is one of our connectors. Watermelon actually connects us with the African continent because that is the continent on which it originated. Okra. And I know some of you out there, if I was watching the entire audience, are making your okra faces like, ew. You either love it or hate it. But the bottom line is it connects us with the African continent. Then there are things that we don't think about, like sesame. Sesame was originally brought as a seed oil, oil seed rather. It was brought originally Jefferson was a big proponent of using sesame oil to replace olive oil, but sesame arguably harks back to the African continent. We'll then find things like, okay, here's one that nobody thinks of, but that is really something that also harks back to the African continent: coffee, Ethiopian highlands. All of those of y'all that are running out to Starbucks don't know, but you were drinking something that connects us with the African continent. So then when you start to look at those ingredients, you start to think and you start to look and notice some of the dishes that result. There are other things that come in that farming, animal husbandry thing, free ranging for cattle, rice production. And I know that Dr. Black knows a lot about that through his wife, who is writing an opera on rice and rice production in the low country of South Carolina. But all of these things are connectors that connect us intimately with the African continent. So then we start to look at what the Black family is eating at table. And you're finding more things that connect us. You're finding dishes like red rice, which connect us absolutely with the red rice dishes of the western parts of Africa, like chebujen in Senegal and jollof rice in Ghana or Nigeria. You'll find that we eat things like fish stews, we eat leafy greens. The greens may be foraged, but they are greens. They're not necessarily the African greens, but the cooking methods of cooking them with a seasoning piece of something. In the American, diaspora, it tends to be pork. On the African continent, it can be dried smoked shrimp or mollusk of some sort. But all of these connectors are ways that the families kind of manage to maintain themselves, not only maintain themselves physically, corporally, but at table and as family. Then if you flash forward as we get into the 20th century, many of these recipes are still maintained. Many of these recipes are still used. Many of these recipes still show up on table. They spread north and west with the Great Migration. But when we look, we see things around like what goes on most African-American families' Thanksgiving table. You got your mac and cheese. Well, guess what? Probably popularized, not necessarily originated, but by James Hemmings, Thomas Jefferson's enslaved chef, first person to make mac and cheese, and probably first celebrity American chef, and arguably first French-trained American chef, certainly probably first French-trained African-American chef. You find other dishes that might turn up on Thanksgiving tables like Charleston's red rice. You'll find the various kinds of greens that we have, the collard greens. I don't know that collard greens turn up on people's Thanksgiving tables, but they turn up. You look at all sorts of things like that, and you see that there is a thread of continuity that takes us all the way from the period of enslavement all the way through to today's tables at which families sit, commune, and communicate. One of my favorite words is commensality, and that is the art of communing over food. And I think that's what we have done, and that's what we do as African-American families.
I just wanted to, if you'd allow me to interject right quickly, Dr. Harris. When you mentioned the caller, are you referring to Peter Clark?
Sorry.
When you mentioned about Thomas Jefferson's, are you referring to Peter Clark by any chance? Or
No, I'm referring to James Hemmings.
John? Okay, understood.
Hemmings.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
James Hemmings, who actually his whole family was involved with food. So it's James Hemmings, his brother Peter, and then some more distant relatives who were all in those kitchens at Monticello and then ultimately at the White House.
We have here in Cincinnati someone who came out of that kitchen that lived here in Cincinnati, and he had a baking business.
Okay.
And so there's a strong connection as far as with that. And so that's why I was asking that question.
Wasn't he a Hemmings descendant though?
I don't want to. Dr. Jackson, I'm not quite sure if
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm
not quite sure.
Yeah.
Sure either.
To be continued. Google rapidly.
So speaking of this outlook that Dr. Jackson had given us and the impact of the culinary tradition that Dr. Harris has talked about, Kristen, can you talk a little bit about the diversity in the Black family structures and the Black family network?
Absolutely. Before I start to explain how our families are structured today, I want us to go back and think about how were our family structures before colonization. And so prior to coming to the Americas as slaves, according to Dr. Nzinga Mexer, who is a cultural anthropologist and West African religion scholar, she explained that what you can see up and down through West Africa and arguably all of Africa is a diverse family structure, one that is very different from what we know is the SNAF, the standard North American family, which is a mother, a father, and 2.5 children. They look very different. So prior to us coming here, we were very communal in nature. While it was different than our nuclear family, what we're seeing is that men had their own quarters, women had their own quarters. And one thing that Dr. Mesker has explained is that children were able to sleep with whomever they chose. The idea of it takes a village to raise a child or to be raised by a neighbor, to be raised by a grandparent, to be raised by somebody who may not be biologically connected to them, because everybody in the community had a place and a space. So now that family structure doesn't sound really different than what we're seeing now. We're seeing grandparents as caregivers. We're seeing children in foster care where they're getting love from people who they aren't biologically connected with. But what's different is the context, the space, and the place. So what we're seeing now is that our ancestors who were in America, we have always been at the mercy of family to our oppressors. And the idea of being able to maintain family bonds, that was something that we have not had control over. And how has our ability to not form a family, how has that shaped our families today? So I'm gonna go to the literature. In an article by Bertocci and Demisio entitled Bitter Sugar, and it's speaking of slavery and the Black family, researchers actually wanted to assess the effect empirically that historical slavery had on the African-American family. They hypothesized that the Black family structure is most likely in association not with the intensity of historical slavery per se, but the slavery on sugar plantations. And they believe that the slavery on the sugar plantations is what has increased the likelihood of Black families being headed by single female women. And on these sugar plantations and the extreme outcomes at these sugar plantations, what we were seeing it was patterns that pushed matriarchality, forced celibacy for males. We're seeing early widowhood for females, and we're also seeing father absentee in small children. What the researchers found was that as of 1850, sugar suitability is associated with higher ratios of males to females and low fertility with the slave population. So from 1880 to 1940, this higher sugar suitability determines a higher likelihood of single-headed households. They also found the effects of sugar was driven by Black, yet weakens with the Great Depression. But they found that between 1880 and 1930, an even stronger intergenerational legacy of sugar suitability for migrants was linking the consistent effect of slave life on sugar plantations across generations in the United States. So what that's saying is, from 1850 all the way up until 1930, we're seeing the impact of the desirability and sugar suitability and how that has impacted the structure of the Black family. It is only until 1990 that the effect of sugar suitability is replaced by just general slavery and the Black share. So we're looking at how Blacks fared doing Black codes. We're not even like, that's when we're starting to see the effect on that. Now, while it wasn't a small, we had a small population of sugar farming here in America. So this was a very small sample, but it does give evidence to the fact that our family formations have not been by choice. And also they have also been in a space in which we have not been able to control some of the outcomes with our families. So what we're seeing now in 2019, we're seeing 68% of Black children are being raised in single parent households. I'm not here to argue whether or not that is the best structure to have, but what I am here to say is that working with hundreds of Black families, I have found that it is hard, and that how our ancestors were able to survive, if we're seeing the effects of sugar plantations and forced families removal, what we're seeing is that community was the buffer between every type of family structure that we've had. So grandparents being able to raise grandchildren in whatever context that we've had it in, we've always had community. And that spirit of community is something that we have brought, that is what is imprinted in Black family DNA, within Black family culture, is the ability to be able to assist your neighbor. And so I would like to challenge everyone that when we're looking at Black family formation, I like to challenge us to look at it in a way in which we are still seeing the effects of what has happened in our past and how our families are being structured. And it hasn't even accounted for some of our most recent tragedies as far as mass incarceration, crack cocaine, and we're seeing a decline in the community to be able to support the diverse family structures that have always been there. And so I am challenging us to really look at what it means to be a Black family outside of the community context, and how we can encourage community now when we see that our Black families, in whatever structure they are the most fragile. And when we look at the idea of the Black family being structured as being very matriarchal centric, which is the Black mother is sacred in our family, we're also seeing that there's an increase in Black mothers, and whether that's grandmothers, aunties, or whatever, we're seeing the increase in Black mothers psychologically being able to carry our families. And the increase in mental health problems, we're seeing an increase in major depressive disorders. We're seeing an increase in the single-headed household, which impacts the children, which in turn impacts the structure of the next generation of the Black family. So how do we show up as a community to be able to assist in whatever form our families are being, in whatever structure our families are formed in? How can we show up with community? Because community truly is the buffer into which whatever form the Black family is in is to support the Black family.
Thank you, Christine. I want to go back a little bit and try to pull a lot of what the three of you were talking about together and pose this question. In the 21st century, what is, or can you talk about the various Black family profiles, taking in consideration those impacts that Dr. Jackson talked about that revealed itself in the literature and in the studies, the manipulation of the Black family, whether intentional or unintentional, by government and society, as well as the ability to adjust to those manipulations or to the tragedies that Christine had talked about. What do we see in the 21st century when we look at a profile of the Black family?
I think that's a complex question. I think because there's so many facets of it, I think try to wrap your hand around a true image of what exactly is a typical Black family is hard to put your hands on. I mean, just taking one aspect of it, I think from a resiliency standpoint, I think we don't see a true image of what the Black family historically, reaching back to the continent, or even in the past century, we haven't seen a true image of what that means, and we're reaching to figure out what that really means for communal concepts. I mean, for example, just cooking, one could make the argument, and some folks have made this argument, that the aspect of cooking in a family is a communal activity intentionally, because it helps to fortify the family by cooking out of one pot and bringing people together to discuss and talk about what it means to be a Black person in the United States. So there's so many facets of it, and I'm just putting that out there for a discussion, because a true image, I'm not really sure we've seen what that is.
I just want to interject. I think from what I've witnessed out of my personal life, I think we've had to reimagine what the Black family comprises of, because there's been so many disruptions over generation after generation, whether it was enslavement, if it was through Jim Crow, which ushered in the convict lease system that led to mass incarceration, when fathers are being pulled out of the home. You're talking about the period of the Nadir, when we had lynchings that were taking place by fathers being lynched, mothers being lynched, and the trauma that goes with that. We've had to constantly reimagine about what the Black family looks like. And so that's why you have in the family structure, sometimes you have, best friends. That's not my friend, that's my brother. Best friends, no, that's my cousin. So those ideas about family are very complex within the Black family structure, because we've had to reimagine what that looks like. And so I do have another question from the chat, but I want to make sure that the panel, if they had something to add to that particular question before I raise the question from the chat.
Well, I wanted to just add that I think that with all of that, there's also the whole notion of not just the preparation of food communally, but the communal eating of food, which is something that I think in its breakdown is manifesting some of, or is encouraging, if you will, some of the difficulties that we have today. If you think about the family table, and I probably get the prize for age on the panel, so I can think about the family table at another point in time, but it was a family table, whether it was nuclear or extended, people ate together. Today, we don't do that. Somebody comes home and grabs this, somebody else grabs that. We may eat together every once in a while, but that is a disorganizing, if you will, of those structures that soon to be Dr. Haynes talked about. So I think that with all of that, we're seeing all of these things in some ways break down. I did want to add, though, that some of the data in terms of sugar is really more a Caribbean phenomenon. If we look at the distinctions between Caribbean family structures and African Americans, as in the South and beyond family structures, we can see some of those differences as they play out and as they are played out. Sugar in the United States only grows up maybe as far as some parts of Georgia. So we've got large areas of the, slave belt, if you will, that were not inflected by those traditions at all. It's also probably, of all of the cash crops, one of the most brutal and the most intense labor-wise, so that it, it kind of takes the hat to everything. But what we find in sugar and beyond sugar with other cash crops, be they, well, all of them are agricultural, is this need for community, this incredible ability to form and maintain community. Now, what we're talking about as Black family may extend to be community when it goes beyond that individual nuclear mommy daddy 2.5, was it 2.3 or 2.5 kids? When we go beyond that, then we're talking community. That's your church. Those may be your sorors or your frat brothers, or your neighbors, or those people that take you by the hand when you can't. And that's what the Black family has kind of depended on, certainly in the latter part of the 20th century when I was around and beyond, because that's the community that we're talking about. That's the family that we've been talking about, the family beyond the family, if you will, or the friends who become family, or that extended family that, those are the folks who, when somebody dies, come by the house with the casseroles and say, "It's gonna be all right, baby. I got this," or "You give me that," or "We can exchange this." These are the people who, even now in the pandemic, are holding up communities, holding up their part of the sky, as it were. And I think all of this is a part of what we're talking about when we talk about Black family. It's an extended, it's a communal family, if you will. It's a very different thing. I'm gonna shut up now.
I absolutely agree. And if I want to give a snapshot, maybe, and this is me telling my age, the millennial snapshot of what the Black family looks like, and where we can see this is online. And seeing the Black family online, we're seeing them in such a diverse spectrum of how Black families are presenting themselves. And what I'm seeing on two very opposite ends of the spectrum is that we have people who are ascribing to very traditional values of what it means to be family. And so on the opposite end of people ascribing to new values of what it means to be families. I think the thing, like you said, Dr. Harris, that binds us is this idea of community and extended community. And now that extended community is extended to social media. And so the Black family looks very different than we've ever looked before, as far as people who we are now considering family, because some of these people you may not have physically met, but you've created this bond online to be able to support you in whatever way in which you need, that you might have traditional support from a blood relative or someone that is in close proximity.
I think one of the essence of what both of my panelists are saying also is to understand the power of Black culture and Black people in the Black family, traditional or not. They have power to tap into that's always been there. That power is inside of them. And so that's why it's been attacked all the time, because if they harness that power, it's mind-boggling, because that power and that culture has always been there, from the continent to enslavement to after enslavement. It's that thing, that power, that spirit, that whatever you want. It's powerful, and people are trying to take it away. But to harness that and to understand how you can wield it is the key to understanding a Black family and a Black culture linking itself together.
Thank you. There was one question from the chat I want to get a response from, and whoever, this is open to the panel. How has the commercial food industry impacted the Black culinary traditions? So we're talking about economics. I guess we can go, how has the commercial food industry impacted the Black family culinary traditions?
Well, remember now, never forget that the United States of America is a capitalist country. Okay. And so when you want to talk about food traditions and how the food traditions have, the big, you can go big brands, small brands, you can go African American brands. I mean, when you start to commercialize stuff, you've got all of the inherent madness that comes with commercialization. Okay. What goes into the food to make it shelf stable? Because it's no longer what it was. It has now become something else. It becomes something that is a product somewhere. You get all of the ingredients that go into it. You get the branding that goes on it. New book out, I'm going to forget the title, The Rib King, all about the branding of a product, the use of African Americans in branding products, turn of the century. You think about all of that raft of African American, Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, the cream of wheat man's name was Rastus. You get all of that that comes along with the commercialization of food in sort of backhanded praise to African Americans. I mean, Aunt Jemima ain't on that box because she can't cook, but do we want her on that box? It's all of those kinds of things. It's the appropriation, another word that applies to African American food. How does the food get appropriated? What kind of control do people have? Even if at inception, some of the creators, and there were very few, but there were a few, were African Americans. How much are they able to control their own product once it is out of their hands in a way? It's a very complex question to which that was a very simplistic answer.
Thank you. We have several questions that are coming through the chat to be able to get. I think this is a very important question that is raised. Thank you, Anne, for this question. And this probably would be for Kristen. Can you explain the concept of sugar suitability?
The authors were saying, when they were speaking about sugar suitability, was the demand for sugar and the ability to be how much they were producing. So they were finding that the demand for sugar was what was driving the Black family structure of and the extreme conditions where we were seeing the Black family structure as far as less males, single mother headed households, and also children not having fathers.
So if I can add to Kristen's answer, one of the aspects of the sugar plantation industry is that enslaved people had an average lifespan under that system of about 7 to 8 years in that industry. You have to look at the conditions that sugar was produced. And Dr. Harris had talked about that being primarily a Caribbean or South American product, southern part and the coastal part of the southern part of the United States. So it had a tremendous impact on the mortality rates of Black males and females, but primarily Black males, to be able to participate in these family networks that Kristen had talked about.
Thanks, Sam. I'm not quite sure if I think you got kind of glitched a little bit there. If everyone can hear, I think you're back with us. And so what I want to do is, while we're going through that as well, the other question that was posed in the chat before we get closing remarks is that our Black family strengths, in parentheses, Hills Billingsley, used as a paradigm for community solutions for improvement for the condition of the Black family. So it's relating to Black family strengths. it started out, I guess that's a question. I hope I'm asking it the right way. I am reading this off the chat.
I think what they're asking are the strengths that are highlighted in Billingsley, are they used as a paradigm for community solutions? So are we using these strengths to actually build out community projects or products to be able to improve the condition of the Black family? Absolutely. I think that's what a lot of people who are in the nonprofit world or people who are in the food world that we're capturing in any field, we can see where we are capturing the strengths that we have and we're teaching from those strengths to be able to improve the condition with the Black family. I'm doing that. I'm doing it through food. You know, I'm capturing the idea of having the strength of coming together and eating and your family history through food, being able to capture that, to be able to have families know their family history, know the people who are in their family, and move forward for the improvement of their family. So there are people I feel like who are absolutely building community solutions from a strengths perspective.
I want to give the panel an opportunity as we look at the topic of dealing with the bonds of the Black family. If you could take a minute or two to what resonates most significant under this topic that you would like to leave our attendees with. And we can begin with Dr. Jackson.
I'm gonna make it quick and to the point. I think that my last thing would be to understand the power and the legacy and the perseverance of the Black family. Because if you understand historically that one of the intentions of the enslavement period was to destroy Black families, it's survival. Just surviving is power. Just surviving that situation through all its trials and tribulations. There's something inside of the culture that helped Black people survive. And if you can tap into that survival, perseverance, and understand the ancestors that came before you went through similar, worse situations, you can tap into that historical power. The Black family has survived. And then for me, that's the key of understand perseverance and survival and the power of the Black family and its spirit and its legacy.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. And Kristen, I will say, I want to definitely highlight that you have this wonderful project that even my wife participated in with that you have over your shoulder there, Delicious Legacy, and then using those recipes and whatnot. And so I want to encourage for people to look that up. But could you give us your final remarks for this evening as well that you would like to leave us with?
I like to leave us with this. We all are traumatized, it just shows up differently. And the things in which we have found strength in as the Black family, that we have to hold on to them, that the resilience, the ingenuity, all of these things I feel can be found on our plates, in our family recipes, in our communal practices, in the way in which we come together. So holding on to that and knowing that it is dear, especially my younger generations, understanding that family and community is what we have leaned into and what we're going to need to lean into in the future to be able to take the Black family to the next level.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Harris, a few wise words from you that you would like to leave us with as well.
Just basically drawing from what everyone said, what Dr. Haynes said about how we are going to need this and how this is going to be our strength in the future. As she was speaking earlier, I was thinking of, ironically, a Netflix television show, Pose, which some of you haven't even seen or heard of, but it is about gay community in New York City in the 1970s when they formed families. And it was the families that got them through the AIDS crisis, and the families that they could cling to during that crisis that then enabled survival. From that, I will go on to talk about what Dr. Jackson said, in the sense of, he mentioned three big things: power, legacy, and perseverance. But I would say that if we put all of that together, what we come up with is the thing that probably makes the Black family most terrifying to people, and that is strength. The strength of the bonds of the Black family, the strength of the connectedness of the Black family, be it the family of blood, be it the family of head, be it the family of heart, be it the family of neighborhood. That strength, that power, that extraordinary ability to survive the unspeakable, to face forward and keep going, is what family is all about.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I definitely want to give my co-moderator in this, Samuel Black, if there's anything that you want to say as before I bring the remarks to close us off this evening.
I just really would like to say thank you to our three panelists. You know, your conversation has really enriched me and educated me beyond what I thought I knew about the Black family. But it also gives us an opportunity in this platform and during this month and this year to reflect on the Black family, regardless of whether it's social movement that's going on or the pandemic. As Dr. Jackson and Dr. Harris and Kristen has talked about, the strength and continuity of the family bond, regardless of what we face, we change, and those abilities to adjust to external forces on the family is the reason why we're all here today.
Thank you. I echo the same sentiments. I am humbled and thankful for the outstanding panel that we were able to assemble together. And speaking of family, I view all of you on this panel as family. I know where to go to get some recipe. And keep it in mind as we celebrate Black History Month. I say Black history happens every day. So when you're drinking a cup of coffee, that's Black history. When you are making rice, that is Black history. So that is so very important to have the understanding of the contributions that our ancestors have made into our lives. This is the opportunity and time for us to reflect upon that. And when I say that's for everyone, regardless of your race, to understand this wonderful contribution. I want to thank this outstanding panel. I want to thank our respective institutions. Please go to our websites. Sam is a part of an outstanding institution, wonderful programming that they're doing beyond. Please encourage you to do that. I encourage you to come to visit our website at freedomcenter.org. And like many institutions within this pandemic, we want to encourage you to invest into us, either through membership or by donations. We will continue to be an educational resource for our communities, as well as an uplifting force for our communities. Thank all of you for joining us this evening, and have a blessed evening. Thank you.